The lock clicked behind her with a sound that wasn't quite a sound. It was an ending. The way a coffin lid settles into place. Final, patient, without apology. Marin Ashby stood on the porch of the only house her children had ever known. In her coat pocket sat a thin envelope holding $500. In her arms, her 6-year-old daughter Wren pressed a tear-stained face against her neck. At her hip, her 8-year-old son Silas tried to stand the way his father used to stand. Chin up, shoulders set, eyes burning but dry. Behind that locked door was 10 years of her life. The kitchen where she'd learned to bake her husband's mother's bread. The nursery wall where Calder had penciled the children's heights every birthday. The porch swing where he'd held her hand the night he proposed, 6 months before a heart attack took him at 36 and left her with 2 babies and a brother-in-law who couldn't wait to change the locks. She had 1 hour to leave. She had used 53 minutes. The wind on the ridge above town was already calling her name. The townsfolk called the place up there the Grieve, said no one had lived there in 60 years, said it would kill her before winter. But Marin had $450 left, 2 children to keep alive, and a secret folded against her chest she didn't yet understand. She started walking. The lock clicked behind her with a sound that wasn't quite a sound. It was an ending, the way a coffin lid settles into place, final, patient, without apology. Marin Ashby stood on the porch of the only house her children had ever known. The November wind pulled at her coat, the coat that used to be Calder's, the one she'd taken to wearing in October because it still smelled like him. Sawdust, pipe tobacco, the cheap soap he refused to give up even after she bought him better. It didn't smell like him anymore. Just wool, just cold. In her pocket sat a thin envelope, $500. She had counted it twice. The bills were so new they stuck together, like Roland had walked into the bank that morning and asked for the cleanest stack they had, like he wanted her to know he'd thought about it. In her arms, 6-year-old Wren pressed a tear-stained face against her neck. Wren didn't understand. Not really. She kept asking when they were going home. "This is home," Marin had said an hour ago. Inside, this was home. Not anymore. At her hip, 8-year-old Silas stood the way his father used to stand. Chin up, shoulders set, eyes burning but dry. He had not cried once. Not when his uncle came to the door 3 days ago with the lawyer. Not when the boxes were being filled. Not even when he had to choose which of his books to leave behind. He had become someone she didn't recognize. A small, quiet man in an 8-year-old body. Behind that locked door was 10 years of her life. The kitchen where she'd learned to bake her husband's mother's bread. The nursery wall where Calder had penciled the children's heights every birthday. Silas at 3, Silas at 4, Wren at 1, barely able to stand, Wren at 2. The marks went up like a staircase only her family could climb. The porch swing where Calder had held her hand the night he proposed. June, lightning bugs. He had been so nervous he forgot to ask the actual question, and she had said yes anyway, laughing into his shoulder. 6 months ago he'd put his hand to his chest at the kitchen table, said it felt like heartburn, asked her for water. He was dead before the glass touched his lips. 36 years old, strong as the oak fence he'd built around the south pasture, strong as the men in his family had always been, until he wasn't. The autopsy used words like myocardial, cardiomyopathy, familial, words that meant nothing and everything, words that meant her husband had been carrying a thing inside him for years that no one had seen. Now Marin carried what was left of him, 2 children, a wool coat that no longer smelled like him, and a brother-in-law who had waited exactly 6 months and 1 day to read the will out loud. The will from 2011, back when Roland and Calder were still brothers, before Roland moved to the city, before the failed restaurant, before the second failed restaurant, Before the loans Calder had co-signed and quietly paid down without ever telling her, the will had been clear. If Calder died without a son of legal age, everything went to Roland. The land, the house, the herd, the barn. Calder had rebuilt with his own hands the summer Silas was born. Everything. Calder had been 26 when he signed that paper. He had not yet learned what his brother could become. Roland had given her 1 hour to leave. He had stood in the doorway with his arms crossed while she packed. His face was a mask of polite impatience, the face of a man performing a distasteful duty. He kept checking his watch. When she carried the last bag to the porch, he pressed the envelope into her palm. His fingers were cool and dry. "This is a final settlement," he had said, his voice low, polite, empty. "It's more than the law requires. It's more than you deserve, some might say. Find a place in town. Or better yet, go south. It's no place for a single woman with children out here. $500. A life. Erased. For the price of a used refrigerator." She had not screamed. She had not begged. She had not given him the satisfaction. She had used 53 minutes of her hour. She left the last 7 on the porch like a gift she refused to receive. Now she stood with 2 children, 2 suitcases, a canvas bag of canned goods Roland's wife had silently slipped into the pile when Roland wasn't looking, and the coat. The coat. She slid her hand into the inner pocket out of habit, the way she had 1,000 times over the past 6 months, just to feel where his hand had been. Her fingers brushed something. Paper. She stopped. She had been through every pocket of that coat. Every one. She had washed her face into the lining at night. She had memorized the weight of it. There had not been paper in this pocket. There had been. She must have missed it. Her hand closed around it. A small folded square, pressed flat, tucked deep into the lining where the seam met the bottom hem. The kind of place a man hides something when he doesn't know who might look. She pulled it out, her own name on the front, in Calder's handwriting. Maren. The world stopped. Wren shifted in her arms. Silas looked up, his small face turning toward hers. "Mama?" She closed her fist around the paper, slipped it back into the pocket, smiled the way mothers smile when their hearts are breaking and there are small eyes watching. "Nothing, sweetheart. Let's go." She did not open it on the porch. She did not open it on the dirt road that led down from the only house her children had ever known. She did not open it as they walked past the mailbox Calder had painted blue the summer they were married, past the fence post he had carved their initials into, past the spot where the gravel turned to County Road and the wind picked up because there was nothing left to break it. She did not open it because she could not let her hands shake, not in front of the children, not yet. She walked, they walked, the wind walked behind them like a fourth person who refused to leave. The town was 3 miles down, Bramble Falls, population just under 1,000, the kind of place where the gas station closed at 6 and the diner closed at 8, and everyone knew whose truck was parked, where and for how long. By the time Maren reached the county clerk's office, the children's noses were red and her hands were cracking from the cold. The clerk looked up when the door chimed. He was a tired man in a tired tie. He had been the clerk since before Maren was married. He had known Calder. He had known Calder's father. He had known the will. He had also known what was coming. The whole town had. She watched his face as he recognized her. The flicker of pity. The flicker of something else, harder to name. Embarrassment, maybe. The kind that good people feel when they have not been brave enough to say something to a bad person on someone else's behalf. Maren did not need his pity. She needed land. "I want to see the tax foreclosures," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had practiced it on the road. The clerk hesitated. Then he reached for the binder. He set it on the counter between them like a body. "Most of these aren't fit, ma'am." "I know." He turned the pages slowly, the way a man turns the pages of a hymnal at a funeral. She read the list. Her finger moved down the column. Acres, township, asking price. Most of the prices were impossible. 2,000, 1,500, 800 for a leaking shack with no septic. She had $500 to her name, minus the canned beans, minus what she'd need for flour and salt and the first week of food. Her finger stopped near the bottom. Lot 74, Whisper Ridge, 5 acres, stone cottage, $450. The clerk saw where her finger landed. His face changed. "Oh," he said, quietly. "Ma'am." He took off his glasses. He set them on the counter. "That one's called the Grieve." She waited. He glanced at the children. Silas was watching the wall clock tick. Wren was asleep in her arms. He lowered his voice. "That cottage hasn't had a living soul in it for 60 years. The land's all granite. The wind up there'll take the breath out of a man. There's a reason nobody's bought it. There's a reason it keeps coming back to the county. It's all I can afford. There's the shelter in town," he tried. "Until you can—" "I'm not going to the shelter. I'm not asking permission. I'm asking for the deed." He stared at her. She stared back. Whatever he saw in her face made him stop trying. He drew the form from a drawer. He filled it out by hand. He took her $450 in cash. He stamped the deed twice. He slid it across the counter. "Ma'am," he said. He waited until she looked up. "You need anything, anything at all, you come back here. You hear me?" She nodded once. She didn't trust her voice. She tucked the deed into her coat, next to the folded paper she had not yet read. Outside, the sun was already low, the kind of winter sun that gives no warmth, just light. Pale gold, slanting across the rooftops of a town that had watched her grow up and watched her marry and watched her bury her husband and was now watching her walk uphill with 2 children and everything she owned in 2 suitcases. A few faces in windows, one curtain pulled back, then dropped. No one came outside. Marin did not look up at them. She kept her eyes on the road. The lane to Whisper Ridge began at the edge of town. It was paved for the first quarter mile. Then it became gravel. Then it became something less than gravel, a rutted track, then a footpath. Then the suggestion of a path, climbing the bare spine of the ridge between wind-twisted pines. The wind grew teeth the higher they climbed. Silas walked beside her. He had insisted on carrying one of the suitcases himself. It was almost as tall as he was. He shifted it from hand to hand every 50 steps. He did not complain, not once. Wren walked when she could. Marin carried her when she couldn't. The light went amber, then rose, then gray, and then they came around the last bend. And there it was. The Grieve? It was less a house and more an idea of one. A pile of gray stones clinging to the side of the ridge like something that had grown there. The roof was half rotted, slates missing, timbers exposed and black with age. The mortar between the stones had crumbled in 100 places, leaving dark gaps that looked like wounds. The door was still on its hinges. Barely. The land around it was exactly what the clerk had said. Granite, scree, wiry grasses, a few stunted pines bent permanently sideways by a wind that had been pushing them their whole lives. No fence, no well that she could see, no outbuilding, just stone, just wind, just sky. Silas set down his suitcase. He did not say anything. Wren whimpered into her shoulder. Marin sank to her knees. She had not let herself break all day. Not when the lock clicked. Not when Roland pressed the envelope into her hand. not when the clerk looked at her with his pitying eyes. But now, here, with the wind taking the warmth out of her face and her children watching, the wave came, a despair so cold and so vast it felt like the ridge itself had reached up through her bones. This was her doing. This was her folly. She had taken her children from a warm house and brought them to a ruin. She had been a fool. She bent forward until her forehead touched the granite. The stone was so cold it burned. She did not cry, not where Silas could see. But her shoulders shook, once, twice. A small hand on her back. Mama? Silas. His voice was so quiet. We can go inside. There's still some roof. She lifted her head. Her son, 8 years old, standing in the wind on a ridge that wanted to kill them. And the first thing he said was, "There's still some roof." She reached for him. She pulled both children against her. She did not promise them anything. She did not have anything to promise with. She just held them. The wind kept pushing. The ridge kept being the ridge. After a long time, she stood up. Her knees ached. Her hands had gone numb in the wool gloves she'd worn for 10 winters. She walked to the door. She pushed it. The hinges screamed. The smell that came out was the smell of stone and old smoke and time, a smell with no living thing in it. She stepped inside. The cottage was one room with a small alcove off the back. The floor was massive flagstones, uneven, slick, with decades of damp. The hearth was huge, far too big for a room this size. It dominated the wall like a throat. There was no furniture, no glass in 2 of the windows. Birds had been here, so had something larger. She didn't want to know what. But the roof, where it remained, kept the worst of the wind out. And the walls were thicker than walls had any right to be. She set Wren down on the cleanest flagstone she could find. She went back for the suitcases. She dragged them in, one by one. She got a fire going in the hearth from a broken chair leg she found in the corner and the kindling she'd brought from the road. The fire was small, the hearth ate the heat, the room stayed cold, but it was theirs. She heated water in the small pot she'd brought. She made watery oatmeal from the canister Roland's wife had hidden in the bag. She fed the children. She fed herself last, and only a little. She wrapped them in every blanket she had. She lay down between them on the flagstones, her body the only barrier between them and the floor. Wren fell asleep almost at once, the way children do when they have no more strength to be afraid. Silas stayed awake longer. He stared at the ceiling, at the wooden beams. "Mama," he said. His voice was small. "Are we going to die here?" She turned her head toward him. The fire threw a thin orange light on the side of his face. "No," she said. "I promise." He did not ask her how she knew. He just closed his eyes. She waited until his breathing slowed, until his hand under the blanket loosened. Then, only then, she slid her hand into the pocket of the coat. She pulled out the folded paper. She unfolded it by firelight. Calder's handwriting, the way he wrote when he was in a hurry, slanted, pressed too hard. "Marin, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and something is wrong." She stopped breathing. "If anything happens to me, go to Halden Marsh, East Valley, past the old creamery." He keeps to himself. But he knew my father. He knows what's been happening with Roland. He knows what I would not tell you, because I was hoping I could fix it before you ever had to know. I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I am sorry for whatever you are facing alone right now. Go to Halden. He understands. I love you. I love the children more than my own breath. Say. Marin read it 3 times. Her hands were shaking. She had never heard the name Halden Marsh in her life. Calder had never spoken it. Not once. Not in 10 years. She turned the paper over. The back was blank. No date, no further instruction. The fire popped. Wren stirred beside her, then settled. Marin folded the paper. She slid it back into the inner pocket of the coat. She pressed her hand flat over it. What had Calder known? What had he been hoping to fix? What had Roland done? She lay back down between her children. She stared up at the rotting beams above her. Outside, the wind moved over Whisper Ridge like a long, patient sigh. She did not sleep for a long time. The first 3 days passed the way disaster passes, in stunned increments. She used the last of her cash in town the next morning. $40 on flour, salt, dried beans, a small bag of cornmeal, a bottle of liniment for her hands, a heavy tarpaulin, a roll of wire, a small bucket. She bought matches she did not need because Calder had taught her always to have a backup. She bought a candle. She walked back up the ridge with the children at her side, her arms loaded. The townspeople saw her again. Again, no one came outside. She patched the worst of the roof with the tarp. She wedged it under a row of broken slates and weighted it with stones. The wind tried to lift it twice. She tied it down with the wire. She climbed up there in her dead husband's coat with the wind trying to take her off the ridge, and she made the roof do what she needed it to do. She came down with her hands raw and her shoulder aching and a small stunned pride moving through her chest. She had not done that before. She had done it. She hauled water from a sluggish spring half a mile down the slope, iron tasting, cold enough to ache. Wren cried the first time Marin made her wash her face in it. Silas didn't cry. He just clenched his teeth and did it. She mixed mud and dried grass and tried to chink the worst gaps in the stone walls. The wind got through anyway, but less than the night before. She kept the fire going during the day. She let it go down to coals at night to make the wood last. The cold in the cottage was a living thing. It settled in her bones. It made her knees ache. It made her stop being able to feel her fingers by mid-afternoon. She did not let the children see her cry. She cried, sometimes, walking back from the spring, where they couldn't see. The folded note in her pocket burned. Halden Marsh, East Valley, past the old creamery. She did not know how to find him. She did not know what she would say if she did. She did not know if she could leave the children alone to look. On the fourth morning, the knock came. She had not heard footsteps. The wind was loud. She did not hear them. Just the knock, 3 slow taps, polite, patient. She froze. Silas froze. Wren looked up from the floor where she was drawing shapes in the ash with her finger. Marin stood. She picked up the iron poker from beside the hearth. She held it the way Calder had taught her to hold a tool when she might need it to be a weapon. She walked to the door. She opened it 3 inches. A man stood on her porch. He was old, late 60s, tall in the way men of that generation were sometimes still tall. Lean, white hair under a wool cap, a face carved by 60 winters of working outdoors. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, kind, tired. In his hand was a covered basket. He saw the poker. He did not flinch. He took a step back, a small one, enough to show he meant no threat. "I'm not here to trouble you," he said. His voice was low, almost gentle, the voice of a man who had spent more time speaking to animals than to people. "I knew your husband." Marin's hand tightened on the poker. "What?" "I knew Calder," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss." Her throat closed. She had not been ready for a stranger to say his name like that, plain, familiar, the way Calder's own brother had not been able to say it. The man waited. He saw her face. He saw the cottage behind her. He saw the children. He saw the hearth still burning low. He held up the basket. Just slightly. My wife passed 3 years ago, he said. I know what it is to lose half of yourself. I won't come in. I'm leaving this here. He set the basket on the porch. He took another step back. There's bread in there, a jar of preserves, some salt pork, a pound of beans. My wife dried before she died, which means they're old, but they cook fine. You'll find half a pound of coffee, too. I figured you might need coffee. Marin stared at the basket. She could not speak. The man turned to go. She found her voice. Wait. He stopped. She stepped onto the porch. She still had the poker in her hand. She didn't put it down. What's your name? He looked at her. A long look. A look that seemed to be searching her face for something. He decided. Halden, he said. Halden Marsh. The wind moved between them on the porch. Marin's heart stopped, then started again. Wrong. Too fast. She did not let her face change. Did Calder send you? She said. Quietly, so the children wouldn't hear. Halden Marsh looked at her. His eyes changed. Not surprised. Something else. Something that looked almost like relief. He nodded once. Yes, ma'am. He did. She held his gaze. Why? He glanced past her. At the cottage. At the smoke from the chimney. At Silas standing in the doorway watching them. Not today, he said. Not in the cold. Not in front of your boy. But soon. I live east of here, past the old creamery. There's a red gate. If you can find your way down with the children, my door is open. If you can't, I'll come back. He touched the brim of his cap. He turned. He walked down the path with the careful steps of an old man who knew his own knees. Marin stood on the porch with the iron poker in one hand and her dead husband's letter pressed against her chest under the wool coat. She watched him go until the path swallowed him. She turned back to the cottage. Silas was watching her, with eyes too old for his face. Mama, he said. Who was that? She crouched down. She put her hand on the back of his head. She pulled him gently against her. She didn't have an answer for him. Not yet. A friend, she said. I think. Inside, she set the basket on the flagstones. She lifted the cloth. The bread was still warm. The smell of it broke something in her she had been holding closed for days. She tore a piece for Wren, a piece for Silas, a small piece for herself. She ate it standing by the hearth. She did not realize she was crying until Silas said, very quietly, Mama, you're crying. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. The days became a rhythm. Wake before light, build up the fire, boil water, make oatmeal or thin bean broth, feed the children, eat last, eat little. Carry water from the spring, 2 trips because the bucket was small and her arms were tired. Patch what she could, repack mud in the wall cracks, try to clear the chimney of the soot that kept choking it, try to keep the wind out of the windows by stuffing rags into the worst gaps. Read to the children at night by the candle, the one book she had grabbed when she packed, a worn copy of stories she had read to Silas when he was Wren's age. Sleep on the flagstones with both children pressed against her. Halden did not come back. She thought about him every day. She did not go looking, not yet. She was afraid to leave the children. She was afraid of the answers he might give her. She was afraid of what Calder had been hoping to fix. Roland did not come either, but she felt him, in the way people in town had not come to the porch, in the way the curtains had dropped, in the way Bramble Falls had decided, collectively, to let her freeze. She knew, without being told, that her brother-in-law had let it be known she was not to be helped. The cold deepened. The 4th day after Halden's visit, a wind came down off the ridge that she had never felt before. Not wind, pressure. The kind of wind that has weight, the kind that pushes things over. The smoke from the chimney did not rise. It came back down into the room. Marin had been kneeling by the hearth, feeding it the last of the broken chair legs. The smoke billowed back over her, stinging, acrid. Wren coughed. The fire sputtered. The fire died. The cold rushed in like it had been waiting outside the door. "Mama," Wren said. Wren was crying now, open, loud, scared. Silas was already on his feet, dragging the tarp away from a window, trying to look outside. Marin did not have time to comfort either of them. She had to relight the fire before the cold took the room. She crouched at the hearth. She raked the dead ash with her bare hand. She was looking for any ember, anything that still had life. Her fingers brushed something that was not ash. Stone. She froze. She knew the floor of the hearth. She had cleaned it a dozen times in the last 2 weeks. The flagstones at the base of the hearth had always seemed solid, heavy, set into the floor like teeth set in a jaw. Except this one had moved. Just slightly. Just enough. She brushed the ash aside. The flagstone at the very base of the hearth was loose, not just settled wrong. Loose, movable. Her heart began to beat in a different rhythm. She didn't know yet what it was. She didn't know yet that the rest of her life was about to begin. She just knew that for the first time since the lock had clicked behind her on Roland's porch, something in the world was offering her a question instead of a closed door. She worked her fingers into the crack. She pulled slowly. With a low, deep groan of stone the flagstone gave. She slid it sideways. Ash and dust rose around her. What lay beneath was not dirt, not foundation. It was a square of darker, colder stone set flush into the ground, and in its center, an iron ring. The fire was out behind her. The room was cold. The children were watching. The wind howled around the cottage, looking for a way in. And Marin Ashby, 34 years old, widow, mother, penniless, exiled, knelt on the floor of a ruin she had bought for $450 and reached for the ring. The ring was cold. So cold it bit into her palm, like metal does in January, like a bucket handle at dawn, like the latch of a barn door before the sun has touched it. Marin wrapped both hands around it. She braced one foot against the hearthstone. She pulled. Nothing. She pulled again. Harder. Her shoulders burned. Her back protested. Something deep in her spine made a sound it should not have made. Still nothing. The iron was set into a slab. The slab was set into the floor. The floor was set into 140 years of silence. "Mama," Silas said. He was beside her now, hands on his knees, watching the ring like it might bite her. "What is it?" "I don't know," she said. "I don't know." She braced her feet wider. She bent her back the way Calder had once shown her, the time they pulled a stuck calf from a heifer in the south barn. "Use your legs," he had said. "Don't break yourself for what your knees can do." She used her legs. The slab moved. Half an inch, but it moved. She gasped. She laughed. A strange, wild laugh that surprised her. She pulled again. Both hands. Whole body. The way a woman pulls when she has already decided she will not stop pulling. The slab lifted. A long groan came up out of the floor. Stone on stone. Wood somewhere groaning back. Air somewhere releasing. The slab came up sideways and settled with a dry, ancient thud. Beneath it was a hole. Square, black, smelling of nothing she recognized. Not damp, not mold, not the wet rot of a root cellar that had been waiting a century to be opened. Cool, dry, mineral, the smell of a stone freshly broken with a hammer. A set of stairs led down. Wren came creeping up beside Silas. She put her tiny hand into Marin's coat pocket, just the fingertips. "Mama," she whispered, "is it a basement?" I think so. Are there monsters? No, baby. How do you know? Because monsters are loud, and this is quiet. Wren considered that. She nodded. Solemn, 6 years old, a small philosopher in a coat 2 sizes too big. Marin lit the candle she had bought in town. The flame steadied, then leaned, just barely, toward the opening. Air was moving, not much, but moving. She told the children to stay by the hearth. She told Silas to keep his sister close. She told them not to follow. She told them she would only be a moment. She descended. The stairs were stone, smooth in the middle from where someone long ago had used them often. The walls were stone too, fitted so tight she could not have pushed a knife between them. 12 steps. She counted. 12. And then the stairs opened into a small round room. She stopped. She held the candle higher. The room was a circle, maybe 10 feet across. The walls were the same fitted stone as the stairs, smooth to the touch, cold, but not damp, not wet, dry as a bone in a desert. In the center of the room stood a heavy oak table. On the table, a book, open, spine cracked, pages lying flat, as if someone had set it down a moment ago and stepped away to fetch something, as if someone had said, just one more page, and then never come back. Beside the book, a small sealed crate. Beside the crate, a candle holder, brass. The wax in it, 100 years old, melted and reset, and melted again by some long dead hand. And beside the candle holder, a small framed picture. Marin walked toward the table slowly, the way you walk into a church when you are not sure you still believe. The book was a journal. She could see that even before she touched it. The handwriting was the careful, beautiful script of a man who had been taught to write by someone who cared whether he wrote well. Black ink, faded to brown at the edges, diagrams in the margins, numbers, arrows, small, precise drawings of gears and channels and shapes she did not understand. On the first page, an inscription, "The last will and testament of my mind. Obadiah Thorne, Mason, Engineer, Anno 1888. She breathed out, Obadiah Thorne. She had never heard the name before tonight. She would never forget it. She set the candle down. She picked up the framed picture. It was a small painting, the kind a man might commission of his wife when she was young and he had a little money and a great deal of love. A woman in a high-collared dress, dark hair pinned up, a serious mouth, eyes that looked sideways at the painter, as if she had been about to laugh, and the painter had told her to hold still. Marin turned the picture over. On the back, in the same careful handwriting, Cordelia, my heart, who taught me to listen to stone. She stood there in the underground room, holding the painting. A woman who had been dead more than 100 years. A woman she had never met. A woman whose husband had built her this. The candle moved, just slightly. Marin looked at the flame. The flame leaned toward the stairs, then leaned the other way, toward a small opening in the wall she had not noticed. A vent, no bigger than her hand. The air in this room was moving. Slowly, patiently, like breath, Marin set the painting down, gently, like it was alive. She opened the journal. She began to read. She did not come up for hours. Silas crept down once to check on her, to bring her a piece of bread he had saved from his own bowl. She didn't even notice him until he tugged on her sleeve. She kissed the top of his head without looking up. Go back, baby. Take care of your sister. I'm fine. He didn't leave. He sat on the bottom step and watched her read. He had never seen his mother's face look like this. Not when his father died, not when his uncle came, This was something else. This looked almost like she was being held. The journal was the life work of Obadiah Thorne. He had been a Mason. He had also been, by his own description, a heretic. He believed the earth was alive. He did not mean that the way a poet means it. He meant it the way a stonecutter means it. He believed the rock had a temperature, the ground had a breath. The deep places of the world held a constant warmth that could be coaxed, channeled, invited inside a human house. He had spent his life proving it. He had built mills, bridges, 3 churches in 3 counties. He had been respected, in a quiet way, by men who did not understand him. And then, the journal told her Cordelia had died in childbirth, the summer of 1886. She was 26. The baby died with her. Obadiah had buried them both on a hillside outside the town where they had lived. And then he had walked away from everything. He had bought 5 acres on Whisper Ridge. Cheap, useless land, stone and wind, and nothing else. He had begun to build. He wrote about her on every page, not in big paeans, in small things, in sentences that read like he was still talking to her. This stone reminds me of the one you laughed at by the river. The light here in October is the color of your hair when you came in from the garden. I have built the south vent at the height of your shoulder, so that when the wind comes from the valley, it will move at the height it would have moved your hair. Marin read these things and did not realize she was crying. The candle burned down. She lit a new one from the box of matches in her pocket. The journal explained everything. The cottage above her head was not a cottage. It was a machine. A passive geothermal system. That was what the modern world would call it, she thought, although she was not sure the modern world had words for what Obadiah Thorne had done. Cool air was drawn from a shaded north-facing vent. The vent was buried in stone and aimed in such a way that the wind itself fed it. The air was pulled down into channels beneath the foundation. The channels ran deep enough to touch the constant warmth of the earth. The warm air rose through hollow spaces beneath the flagstone floor, through carefully placed gaps in the stone walls, out a high southern chimney that drew like a flue but acted also like an exhaust. The hearth was not the heat source. The hearth was the heat sink, the radiator, the mass that held the warmth and gave it back slowly, all night, all winter. The cellar Marin was sitting in was the heart of the system, the central chamber, where the pressures equalized, where the breath of the earth gathered before being sent up to fill the house. He had built this for Cordelia, even though she was already dead, even though she would never sit by his hearth or sleep in his bed or feel the warmth of his floor under her bare feet on a winter morning. He had built it as if she would. He had built it as a covenant, as an apology, as a prayer. The final entry was dated the 14th of December, 1888. The wind rages, Obadiah wrote, unquote, that uncraze. The hearth is warm, end quote. The earth's breath is a gentle sigh against the tempest. I have made a covenant with the stone and the deep places, and they have kept me safe. And Cordelia, I have made you a house that breathes. If you can hear me, anywhere, I hope you know. I am still trying. The journal ended there. Obadiah Thorne had died sometime that winter. Marin did not know how. The journal did not say. He had simply stopped writing. And the cottage had sat for 100 years, waiting. Marin closed the book. She put her forehead down on the open page. She wept, not the way she had wept on the ridge. Not despair. Something else. It felt like being seen. It felt like a man dead for more than a century had reached his hand across the dark and laid it on her shoulder and said, "Daughter, I built this for someone I loved, and I left it here, just in case someone else, someday needed it more than I did. She lifted her head. The candle flame leaned very slightly toward the vent in the wall. The house was still breathing. She climbed the stairs. Silas was asleep on the bottom step. She woke him gently. She carried him up. She put him by his sister near the hearth. Then she sat down in the cold cottage and stared at the open trap door. And she made a decision. She was going to bring the house back, whatever it took, whatever it cost. She was going to listen to a dead man, and she was going to make this place breathe again. The next morning, she showed Silas the diagrams. His eyes got wide. "Mama, this is real?" She thought about it. "Yes, I think so." "How do you know?" "I don't. Not for sure. But the man who wrote this knew, and I think he wanted someone to find it. Someday. Oos, maybe." He stared at the page, at the careful pencil sketches of vents and channels, at the cross-section of the hearth showing the hidden chambers. He was 8 years old. He looked at her like she had just told him the world had a secret in its pocket all along. "Can I help?" She almost cried again. "Yes, baby. You can help." Wren wanted to help too. Marin gave her the smallest job. Moss. They needed dry moss to pack into the vent screens, Obadiah's instructions said. Pull it from the rocks, pile it, spread it out by the hearth to dry. Wren took the assignment with the seriousness of a surgeon. She made a pile, she named it. She told her brother not to touch the pile or she would scream. The mortar came next. Obadiah had been very specific. 2 parts Blue River clay, 1 part fine granite dust, 1 part horsehair for binding. Just enough water to make a stiff paste. There were no horses. Marin cut her own hair. She did it in the cottage with the sewing scissors she had packed. She did not look in any mirror. She took a foot off the length and gathered it in her lap. Then she sat Wren down and asked her, very gently, if she would mind. Wren considered. "Will I look like Mama? Will match?" She nodded. Marin took 6 inches off the back of her daughter's hair. She kept the cutting careful. She kept the line even. She made it look on purpose. She did not let either of them cry. Then she stood Silas up. He pulled his cap off. He held it in both hands. "Cut mine too." "Sweetheart, you don't have to. I want to help. The hair is help." She kissed him on the forehead. She took 2 inches. They had a small bowl of hair on the table at the end of it. Brown, lighter brown, the pale wheat gold of Wren's baby hair, finer than anything else in the world. They used it. They mixed it into the mortar with the granite dust and the river clay and the spring water. Marin found the clay by following Obadiah's diagram, a seam of it along the spring bank. Greasy, heavy, the color of a thunderhead. They smashed granite with hammers to make the dust. It took hours. It filled the air with a fine, sharp powder that made them cough. Silas pounded rocks with the grim cheer of a child who has been given a real job by a grown-up for the first time. The first task was the north intake vent. According to Obadiah's diagram, it was a stone arch low against the back wall of the cottage, 20 feet from the structure, hidden by a buttress of mossy rock. It was buried. Years of landslide and rotting roots had piled 4 feet of debris over it. Marandug. She had only the small spade she had bought in town and her own 2 hands. The ground was frozen at the top. She broke through with a pick she borrowed mentally from her dead husband. Calder, she thought, you taught me how to do this. The summer, we cleared the irrigation ditch. You said the trick was rhythm. Don't fight the ground. Find its tempo. She found a tempo. She dug for 3 days. Her hands cracked. They bled. They scabbed over. They bled again. Silas hauled the smaller rocks away in a bucket. His face was set in the same grim line his fathers used to settle into when there was work and no time to complain about it. Wren ferried water back and forth from the spring. She made it a game. She gave each bucket a name. She told her dolls about the names later. Holden did not come back. Marin thought about going to look for him. East Valley. Past the old creamery. Redgate. She did not go. She told herself she was too busy. She knew that was not the whole truth. She was afraid of what he would tell her. She wanted to know who her husband had been afraid of before she had to face it. And she wanted just a little longer to keep moving, to keep the ache from finding her, to keep her hands busy enough that she didn't have to think about Calder lying in the ground while she fought a ridge for the right to live on it. On the fourth day, she found the second journal. She had not been looking for it. She had been crawling. Obadiah had built narrow stone channels under the cottage floor. The channels were the lungs of the house. She had read his maintenance instructions. The mortar at the joints between different stones had to be replaced. The old mortar was 100 years old. It had crumbled to dust. She had to repack it by hand, in the dark, in a space barely large enough for her shoulders. She crawled in with a candle held in her teeth and a bucket of fresh mortar dragged behind her by a rope around her ankle. The first night she did this, she came out shaking, coughing, covered in clay, convinced she was insane. The second night, easier. The third night, almost peaceful. The channels were beautifully built, smooth, tight, the work of a man who had loved what he was making. She moved through them on her belly. She found the joints. She raked out the dead mortar with a small tool from Obadiah's crate. She packed the new mortar in. Her hands learned a rhythm. Her mind quieted. It was on the fifth night that she found the packet, tucked into a hollow between two stones at a junction she had not noticed before. A small parcel, oilcloth, wrapped tight, the kind of cloth her grandmother had used to wrap pie crusts for the icebox. She pulled it loose. She crawled backward out of the channel. She sat on the flagstones by the candle. She unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a second journal. Smaller, newer. The cover was real leather, soft, worn. Not Obadiah's. The handwriting was a woman's. The first page said, Iris Marsh, Spring, 1978. Marin stopped breathing. Marsh. Her hand went very slowly to her mouth. Iris Marsh. She turned the pages. The woman who had written this had been young when she wrote it. 23, 24, maybe 25. The handwriting was neat and confident and full of a particular energy that Marin recognized. The energy of a woman who had just discovered something and could not contain it. Iris had found Obadiah's journal in 1978, 45 years ago. Almost exactly her own age now. Iris had read every word. Iris had wanted, with her whole heart, to bring the cottage back. She had brought her young husband up to the ridge to show him. She had spread Obadiah's journal on a table. She had begged him to help her. He had refused. He had said it was a madman's dream. He had said geothermal channels in 1888 were nonsense. He had said she was being a fool. He had said they had a real farm to run and could not afford to chase fairy stories. Iris had cried. He had walked out. They had not spoken about it for 2 weeks. When they spoke again, it was about other things, about the cattle, about the year's hay. She wrote, in a hand that broke a little at the end, I have hidden this journal back in the place I found it. I will go on. I will be a good wife. But I have left a piece of myself in this cottage. Perhaps, someday, a woman will come who can finish what I could not. Perhaps she will be braver than I was. Perhaps her husband will believe her. If you are reading this, Be braver. Forgive my husband. He is not a cruel man. He is only a frightened one. His name is Halden. Marin sat with the journal open in her lap. She did not move. Halden Marsh, the old man with the basket, the old man whose eyes had filled with something that looked like relief, the old man whose wife had stood in this exact cottage 45 years ago, who had wept into this exact stone, who had hidden her notebook in the wall like a message in a bottle and gone home to a husband who didn't believe her, a wife who had died 3 years ago, a wife who had carried this grief with her every day of her marriage, a wife who had never gotten to finish. Marin put her hand on the page. She felt again what she had felt the night before with Obadiah's journal, the hand across the dark. Iris Marsh, she said aloud, to the cottage, to the dead. Iris, I'm here. The candle moved, just slightly. That was the day Roland came. He drove a new truck halfway up the path until the rocks beat his undercarriage, and he had to walk the rest. She heard the engine cut. She heard the careful, picky footsteps of a man in expensive boots trying to keep them out of mud. She was at the north wall packing fresh mortar into a joint behind the buttress stone. Her face was streaked with clay. Her hair was tied back with a strip of old shirt. Her hands were red and cracked. She had not slept more than 4 hours a night in 2 weeks. She looked up. There he was, Roland Ashby, in a sheepskin coat she had never seen him in before. He took in the sight of her, the piles of earth, the bucket of water, Silas pounding rocks beside her, Wren sitting on a flat stone with her arms full of moss. His mouth did a thing, not a smile, not quite, a slow, dry, satisfied expression. The expression of a man who has come to confirm a hypothesis. Well, he said, still playing in the dirt. She did not stop working. She heard you were digging your own grave up here, he said. The whole town. They're taking bets. I told them you wouldn't last the month. Roland. She did not look up. I'm not asking you to be here. Oh, I know. He stepped closer, careful, picking his way through the rocks she had pulled up. I brought you something to read. She did not move. He set a folded newspaper down on a stone. He smoothed it flat. It was a copy of the Bramble Falls Weekly. Front page, a column of dates, a list of names, a list of bets. Real bets, real names, people she had grown up around. Some of them had been at her wedding. How many days? How many weeks? Which child first? She read it. Her face did not change. Inside her, something old and patient was already deciding things. You came up here for this. I came up here because I'm your only family, Marin, whether you want me or not. She lifted her eyes. That stopped his mouth. Roland, don't ever use that word about us again. He held her stara. He smiled. He was good at smiling at things he was preparing to crush. I told you, he said. I told you to go south. I told you to take the money and go. You chose this. I did. You chose to drag your children up a mountain to die. I'm not going to die. Look around you. She looked. She looked at the cottage with its patched roof, at the hole she'd dug, at the buckets of muddy water, at her son with his small, fierce face, at her daughter solemnly guarding her moss pile. She looked at Roland. She looked back at the cottage. Look again, she said. Quietly. He didn't. He turned. He started back down the path. His expensive boots slipped on a loose stone. He almost fell. He didn't look back to see if she'd seen. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. She turned back to the joint she had been packing. She pressed the new mortar in. That night she almost broke. She lay on the flagstones between her children. She listened to Wren's quiet breathing. She listened to Silas snoring softly, the way Calder used to snore. The newspaper was still in her coat pocket. She had read every name, every single name. People who had eaten at her table, people whose christenings she had attended, people who had stood in her parlor at Calder's wake and held her hand and said, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Now they were betting on which of her children would die first. She turned her face toward the stones. Was Roland right? Was she insane? Was she chasing a ghost up a mountain while real winter gathered on the horizon? She was packing mud into the walls of a ruin, based on the writing of a man dead 100 years. She was tearing her hands open every day on rocks for a theory she did not understand. She had taken her children from a warm farmhouse and brought them to this. She had taken them. She thought she might be sick. She got up, quiet. She didn't want to wake them. She crossed to the table where Obadiah's journal lay. She opened it. She turned to a page she had marked. A small drawing, tucked between two diagrams, curled up in snow, its body heat preserved by the insulating properties of the snow itself. A drawing Obadiah had made because she suspected he had seen one up here, some winter, just like the one coming. He had written beneath it, "Nature wastes nothing. Its solutions are elegant and eternal. We have only to learn to listen to its quiet wisdom." Marin read it 3 times. Listen. She let out a breath she did not know she'd been holding. She was not fighting the cold. She was not fighting the ridge. She was not fighting Roland. She was learning. From a dead man, from a dead woman, from a wolf in snow. She was learning how to live with the world instead of against it. She closed the journal. She lay back down between her children. She did not break. The next morning, Halden Marsh came back. This time he brought tools, a heavy pickaxe, a coil of new wire, a sack of cured bacon, a long-handled scrub brush, a jar of his late wife's apple butter. He did not knock. He just walked up onto the porch. Marin opened the door before he could. He looked at her. He looked, more than anything, like a man who had been planning to say something for a long time and was finding the words harder than he had expected. "Mrs. Ashby," he said. "Halden." I read it. His face changed. He didn't have to ask what she meant. He just nodded. Slow, old. A man finally facing a debt that had outlived the wife it belonged to. "You found her notebook." "I did." He looked down at his hands. When his eyes came back up, they were wet. "She loved this house," he said. His voice broke. "Just once. She loved this house. And I called her a foolish woman in our own kitchen." She didn't speak. There was nothing to say to that. Not yet. He held out a small wooden box. Plain, hinged, the size of a Bible. "I brought you something else," he said. "She left it with me before she died," she said. "Only give this to someone who finds the other one," she said. "They'll know what to do with it." Marin took the box. She didn't open it on the porch. She brought him inside. She set the box on the table. She opened it. Inside were 3 things: a letter, a small key, and a piece of paper folded into 4, a drawing. She unfolded the drawing first. It was a diagram, a small, careful, beautifully drawn diagram in Iris's hand of a valve, a pressure release valve tucked beneath the cottage threshold, a piece Obadiah had not put in the main journal. A piece Iris had written in a margin he had told Cordelia about in a separate letter Iris had found tucked into the back of his Bible at the Historical Society, a piece he had deliberately omitted from the main work because the system would not hold without it. He had wanted to protect his house from those who would not earn it. Iris had found the missing piece. Iris had hidden it. For someone, for here. Marin put the drawing down. She picked up the letter. She read it. She did not read it aloud. She did not cry. When she had finished, she folded it again. She set it back in the box. She closed the lid. She looked at Halden Marsh. Halden was already on his knees by the hearth. He was an old man, 68. His knees did not bend the way they had once bent. He was on them anyway. He did not look at her face. "Mrs. Ashby," he said. "Maureen, I have come to ask you something." "What?" "Not for forgiveness. I don't expect that. From you or from God." He swallowed. "I have come to ask if I may help. Not because you need me. You don't. You've done more in 2 weeks than I did in 50 years. Because I need to. Because my wife is dead, and I am alive, and I have a debt to her that I will carry into my own grave if I do not lay some of it down here, on this floor. In this house, she loved." He did not look up. He waited. Marin stood in front of the old man who had refused his wife. The old man who had brought her bread on her worst day. The old man whose wife had hidden a key for her in a box for 45 years. The old man who had known her husband. The old man whose grief was a brother to her own. She crossed the room. She put her hand on his shoulder. It was thin, bonier than she expected, the shoulder of a man who had not eaten enough since his wife had died. "Halden, get up." He looked up. "We have work to do." He blinked hard, twice. He took her hand. He let her help him to his feet. Behind them, Silas was watching from the alcove. His eyes were as wide as a child's eyes get. He did not know yet what had happened. He just knew that something in the cottage had shifted, like a stone in a wall sliding, very quietly, into the place it had always been meant to occupy. They worked for 3 weeks. The work was easier with Halden, not because he was strong. He was not. He was an old man with arthritis in both shoulders and a back that had been broken once, decades ago, by a falling beam. He could not crawl in the channels. He could not lift the heavy stones. But he knew things. He knew how stone wanted to settle. He knew how lime took water. He knew how to read a chimney's draft by the sound it made in a wind. He had spent 60 years on these hills. He knew where the clay seam ran. He knew which spring stayed sweet in February. And he loved her son. He loved him quietly. He did not make a show of it. He did not call him a fine boy or pat his head. He simply put a chisel in Silas's small hand and showed him how to hold it. He simply called him by his name, with the same respect a man gives another man at a work site. He simply, on the second day, said to Marin, over the hammer noise, "That boy has his father's hands. He works the way Calder worked." Marin had to walk to the spring before she could speak again. Halden adored Wren too. He told her stories about Iris, about the wildflowers Iris had grown along the back fence of their farmhouse, about the names Iris had given each of the bees. Wren listened. Wren stopped flinching when the wind hit the cottage at night. The repair work was endless. The repair work was specific. Every joint, every seam, every vent screen, replaced with the fine mesh from Obadiah's crate. Every channel scrubbed of soot and packed with fresh mortar made from clay and granite and human hair. The pressure release valve, when they found it, was exactly where Iris's drawing had said, beneath the threshold, cut into the stone like a small mouth. Marin replaced its corroded fitting with a brass piece from Obadiah's crate that had been wrapped neatly in oiled cloth for 135 years and was still bright. "It is," Halden said, holding the brass fitting between his fingers, "the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." The covenant, Marin thought, the stone and the deep places holding. On the evening of the 21st day, Halden and Marin stood over the iron trap door. Silas held the candle. Wren held her brother's coat. Halden looked at Marin. "You should do it," he said. She nodded. She took the heavy iron lid in both hands. She lowered it. She did not let it drop. She lowered it, with both arms shaking from 3 weeks of labor. It settled into its bed of stone. It made a sound, not a clang, a deep, soft thud, like a heart settling into a chest. A sound of completeness. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Marin held out her hand to her daughter. Wren came to her. Marin knelt. She pressed Wren's small palm to the flagstone. Wren's eyes got round. Mama, what? The stone has a heart. The stone has a heart, Marin said. The stone is breathing. That night, Marin lit no fire. She wanted to test it. She made the children put on every layer they had. She made Halden stay for dinner. She heated a stew on the small iron stove that vented through a separate flue. The stove made the room warm while they ate. After they ate, she let it die down. She watched the candle on the table. The flame leaned, slowly, toward a vent set low into the wall. The air was moving. She placed her small thermometer on the table. She placed another on the porch outside. The thermometer outside dropped through the evening from 28 degrees to 23 to 20. The thermometer inside did not move. 52. The flagstones, when she pressed her palm to them, were not warm. Not the way a wood stove makes a floor warm. But they were not cold. Not the killing cold she had lived with for 3 weeks. They were neutral. They were a held breath. They were the temperature of a body at rest. The walls were the same. She crouched by the vent. She held the candle close. The flame drew steadily inward, a long, slow pull. Patient, patient, patient. The house was breathing. She had not believed it would work. She had hoped harder than she had hoped for anything since Calder had died. But she had not truly believed. She believed now. She sat down at the table. She pressed her hands flat against its surface. She looked at the journal. Obadiah, she said. She did not say it aloud. She did not need to. Obadiah. We did it. You and Iris and me. We did it. Halden stood up. He had been quiet through dinner. He had been quiet through the test. He walked to the door. He paused there. He put his hand on the wood. Mrs. Ashby, he said. Marin. Yes, you should turn the radio on. She lifted her head. The radio was on. It had been on low all evening. Static, and a man's voice, faintly. She had not been listening. She rose. She went to it. She turned the dial up. The voice was a meteorologist. The voice was calm and careful and trying very hard to sound calm and careful. The voice was talking about a polar vortex, a weather system unlike anything in living memory, descending from the Arctic 3 days out, maybe 4, hurricane force winds, snow measured in feet, temperatures dropping into the 30 below range, power outages anticipated across the region. Residents advised to prepare. Residents advised to shelter. Residents advised to check on the elderly. Residents advised to lay in fuel. The voice was reading the same script every 15 minutes. Halden stood by the door with his hand still on the wood. He looked at Marin. She looked at him. She looked at her children, asleep already on a bed of folded blankets near the hearth. She looked at the journal open on the table. She looked at the candle, leaning toward the vent, the house, breathing under her feet. She did not say anything. She did not have to. The covenant had been made. The tempest was coming. And for the first time since the lock had clicked behind her on Roland Ashby's porch, Marin Ashby, 34 years old, widow, mother, restorer of 100-year-old breath, was not afraid. They had 2 days to ready a house that had not held a winter in 60 years for a storm the meteorologist on the radio kept calling, in that careful, flat voice, historics. It is a strange word, Marin thought, for something that has not happened yet. She made lists. Halden made lists. The lists overlapped, and then diverged, and then overlapped again, the way two minds work when they are working on the same thing from opposite sides. Water. They needed water. Every jar, every jug, every pot, every bucket she owned full. The spring would freeze. Halden said the spring would freeze hard. He had seen it happen in '83, 2 weeks of ice. A man could die between his own back door and his own pump in weather like that. Food. They had Halden's bacon. They had the apple butter. They had her flour and beans, and the last of the bread. Halden brought up 2 boxes more from his own truck the next morning. Cornmeal, a wheel of hard cheese, onions wrapped in newspaper, a jar of his late wife's pickled green tomatoes. He set the jar on her table. He did not look at it for a long moment. Iris made these, he said. The summer before she got sick. I haven't opened a jar of her preserves in 3 years. I thought I never would. Maren put her hand on his arm. She did not speak. Sometimes, she had learned, you don't. Wood. Even though they did not need it for heat anymore, they needed it for the cook stove. She and Silas and Halden took the borrowed sled 3 times down the ridge to the dead pine grove. They cut what they could. They dragged it up. Silas worked until his small face was red and chapped, and he could not feel his fingers. He did not complain. He did not complain once. On the second trip down, the sky had turned the wrong color. It was a flat color, not gray, not white. Something between iron and bone, a color the sky takes on when something underneath it is about to change. Halden looked up. He did not say anything. He just looked at Maren. She nodded. They moved faster. The last task on the second afternoon was the trapdoor. She and Halden went down into the cellar one more time. They checked the seals. They tightened the brass fitting on the pressure release valve under the threshold. They cleaned the vent grills. They lit the candle on Obadiah's table. The flame leaned toward the small wall vent, steady, patient, pulling. Halden stood in the middle of the small round chamber. He turned slowly. He looked at the walls. He looked at the table where the journal still lay open. He looked at the small painting of Cordelia. He cleared his throat. He said, she was right. Maren waited. Iris was right. All of it. He sat down on the bottom step, slowly, the way old men sit down. He put his face in his hands. Maren did not go to him. Some grief is private, even when it is shared. She crossed to the table. She closed the journal. She wrapped it in the oilcloth Iris's letter had been wrapped in. She placed it on the highest shelf, where the children could not reach. She picked up Cordelia's painting. She set it where the journal had been, where she could see her face, where Cordelia could see the room she had been built for. The storm arrived like a thing with intent, not weather. An invasion. The wind came first, a wind that did not gust, a wind that pushed and pushed and pushed, the way a fist pushes against a door it is determined to open. The cottage stones held. The new mortar held. The wind found the cracks Maren had chinked in October. It did not find a way in. Then the snow, not the snow Maren had grown up with, not flakes, not even drifts. This snow came sideways. It came as a wall. It came at the windows and plastered itself against the glass and turned the windows to slabs of dim ice until the cottage was sealed inside its own white shell. By midnight on the first night, the world outside was gone. There was only the howl of the wind and the steady, quiet space inside the stone walls. Silas stood at the front window. He had cleared a small circle on the inside with the heel of his hand. He pressed his face to it. Mama, what? I can't see the porch. Maren came and stood behind him. She looked over his head. He was right. She could not see the porch. The snow had erased it. The porch was just a curve of white, sloping up from where it had been, toward the door, toward the rest of the wall, until the wall and the porch and the world had become one continuous white. She put her hand on her son's shoulder. "We don't have to see it, baby. It's still there." Halden stayed with them. He had not asked. She had not asked him to. It had simply not occurred to either of them by the second afternoon that he would not. He took the small alcove off the back. He laid his coat on the floor and folded it for a pillow. He insisted he had slept on worse and would sleep on worse again, God willing. He was, in those days, no longer a guest. He was something else. She did not have a word for it. She thought sometimes, when she watched him show Silas how to whittle a clothespin out of a stick of pine, this is what an uncle is. She thought sometimes, when she watched him braid Wren's hair the way Iris must have once taught him, this is what a father looks like in the next room. She thought sometimes, when she watched him stand at the window with his hands clasped behind his back, his old face turned toward the storm, this is what a friend is, a real one, the kind that comes too late and stays anyway. The storm raged for 3 full days. Inside the cottage, the temperature did not move. She watched the thermometer, hourly, the first day, less often after that. Outside, the radio said, the temperature dropped to 31 below by the morning of the second day. The radio said it once, and then went quiet. The power grid in Bramble Falls had failed sometime in the second night. Inside, the thermometer held at 53 degrees. It was not warm. It was livable. It was the temperature of a basement in October, the temperature of a stone church on a cool evening, the temperature of a body at rest. It was for them salvation. They lived inside it. Halden read to the children at night. He had brought, in the bottom of one of his crates, 3 of Iris's old books, stories, children's stories from when his own children, long grown and far away, had been small. He read them in his slow, low voice. Wren fell asleep on his lap. Silas leaned against his side. Maren sat with her hands wrapped around a tin cup of weak coffee. She watched the 3 of them by the light of one candle. She watched the way her son had relaxed his small jaw for the first time in months. She watched her daughter trust the weight of a man's body again. She did not cry. She would cry later about this, about how it looked, about what it had cost to get here. But not now. On the morning of the 4th day, the wind stopped. Maren woke before the others. She had been waking before the others for so long now that her body did not know how to do anything else. She lay still in her blankets. She listened. The silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard. A bright, crystalline, painful silence. She rose, she pulled on her coat, she walked to the door. She put her hand on the latch. The latch was cold. Cold the way iron gets when the air around it has been below 0 for days. She pushed. The door did not move. She pushed harder. A wedge of light. Then a wedge of cold so sharp it took her breath. Then she had to put her shoulder to the wood and shove. The snow on the other side gave, finally, with the dry whisper of weight settling. She stepped out onto her porch. She stopped. She actually stopped. The world had been remade in white. The drifts were as tall as the cottage in places. The pines were buried up to their crowns. The sky was a clear, hard, impossible blue. The sun was up, and the snow had turned the sun into a thing that should not be looked at directly. Diamonds, acres of diamonds, cruel and beautiful. The cold burned her face. She had never felt cold like this. She turned to look back at the cottage. She saw it then. The roof of the cottage was not buried. The snow on her roof had melted from underneath. A neat, even thaw, 6 inches of snow, where her neighbors, she knew without looking, would have 4 feet. The chimney showed clear. The slate where she had patched it showed. The whole roof showed. The earth had breathed all night. The earth had kept her children warm. She put her hand over her mouth. She did not make a sound. But she stood on her porch in 30 below cold, and she shook. Not from cold, from something else. She walked down to the gate. It took her an hour. She broke a path through snow above her hips. She used a shovel Halden had insisted she keep by the front door. She dug, paused, breathed, dug. She thought about Obadiah Thorne climbing this ridge with stones in 1888. She thought about Iris Marsh standing in this same cottage in 1978, weeping. She thought about Cordelia. She thought about Calder. She thought, he would have liked this. He would have stood on this porch and looked at the snow and made a stupid joke about needing a longer shovel. She missed him so much, suddenly, that her knees almost gave way. She kept digging. When she got to the gate, she could see the path down the ridge. She could see Bramble Falls in the distance. There was no smoke. There was no smoke from any chimney in Bramble Falls. The town below her looked like a town that had died. She turned, she went back, she stamped the snow off her boots on the porch. She came inside. Halden was already up. He was drinking coffee at the table. He looked at her face. He knew before she spoke. The town, he said. The town, she said. No smoke. He set his cup down. His hand was steady. It had not been steady this whole storm. It was steady now. We need to go down. I know, she thought. We need to go down. We need to go down. We need to go down. And we have 2 children, and the snow is up to my hips, and Halden is 68. And the cold is going to kill me before noon if I don't move right. She moved right. She and Halden took the sled. They left Silas in charge, 8 years old, with his sister, with the trapdoor, with the journal locked away. She knelt in front of him before she left. She held both his shoulders. If we are not back in 3 hours, she said, you light the stove, you feed your sister, you stay inside this house. You do not open the door for anyone but me or Halden. Silas, promise me. I promise. She looked at him. She had to look away, because if she looked another second, she would not go. She kissed the top of his head. She kissed Wren, asleep by the hearth. She did not let herself look back. She and Halden went down the ridge. The path was a tunnel of snow. Halden led. He used a long pine staff Calder had once made for someone, somewhere, and Halden had inherited the way men in a small town inherit things. He swept the staff in front of him at every step. He tested, he moved, he tested, he moved. Marin followed. 3 miles took them 3 hours. They did not speak much. There was nothing to say. When they came around the last bend, Marin stopped. Bramble Falls. The shelter on Main Street, the big brick building, the high school gymnasium where the town gathered for emergencies. There were people standing outside it. Even from a quarter mile, Marin could see they were standing wrong. Not waiting, not chatting, standing the way people stand when they have nowhere left to go inside. 3 figures lay on the steps, wrapped in blankets, not moving. Halden saw them too. He stopped. He put his hand out, gently, on her arm. Marin, he said. His voice broke. I think we're too late for some of them. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She kept walking. Inside the shelter it was 48 degrees. The generator had failed sometime on the second night. The fuel had been used up trying to keep the heaters running. The pipes had frozen. The toilets had backed up. 3 older people had been put on cots near a kerosene heater that ran out at 3 in the morning. 2 of them had not woken up. The third was alive, barely. Mrs. Wexford, who had taught 2nd grade at Bramble Falls Elementary for 38 years, who had taught Calder, who had taught his brother. Halden knelt beside her cot. He took her hand. He spoke to her in a voice Marin had not heard him use before. Edna, Edna, it's Halden Marsh. Edna, we're going to get you out of here. Edna Wexford's lips moved. She tried to smile. Marin walked through the shelter. She counted 12 people still alive. 12, because they'd have gambling on wood stoves and root cellars. Some of them, she would later learn, had won that gamble. Some had not. She found the mayor in a corner, his face the color of paper. She found 3 small children huddled around their grandmother, who was hoarse from telling them stories to keep them awake. She found old Mr. Atkinson, who had sold her wedding ring to Calder 12 years ago, sitting upright on a cot with his Bible open in his lap, reading aloud to no one in particular. She found Roland. He was in the back, behind a pile of blankets, in the corner farthest from the broken door. His expensive sheepskin coat was wrapped around him in a wad. His knees were drawn up to his chest. His lips were blue. His eyes were open. He saw her. He did not speak. He could not. Marin stood over her brother-in-law. She looked down at him. The man who had locked her out, the man who had pressed $500 into her hand and called it a settlement, the man who had ordered the town not to help her, the man who had driven up Whisper Ridge to laugh at her in the mud. He looked up at her with the eyes of a child who has been left out in the snow. A long, long, long moment passed. Halden came up beside her. He looked down at Roland. Then he looked at Marin. He did not speak. He let her decide. Marin Kelt. She put her hand on her brother-in-law's cheek. His skin was cold the way meat is cold. Roland, she said. His eyes flickered. Can you stand? He tried. He couldn't. Halden bent down. He got one arm under Roland's shoulder. Marin got the other. They pulled him up. He weighed almost nothing. They walked him toward the door. They got 12 people up the ridge. It took 4 trips. They built a sled team. Marin, Halden, 3 of the younger men from the shelter who had been minding the children. They took the sturdiest sled. They wrapped people in every blanket and coat they could find. They took the smallest and weakest first. The children, the grandmother, Mrs. Wexford. Roland was on the 3rd sled. He could not walk on his own. 2 men dragged him. He was a stranger to them by now, just a man in a sheepskin coat. They did not know what he had done. They did not ask. By the time the 3rd sled reached the porch of the cottage, the sun was setting, and Marin had not slept. Silas opened the door. He saw his mother. He saw Halden. He saw the trailing line of half-frozen townspeople behind them. He did not ask why. He just stood aside. He let them in. Marin found out later that he had spent the 4 hours she was gone doing exactly what she had told him to do. He had lit the stove. He had fed his sister. He had stayed inside. And when she was not back in 3 hours, he had not panicked. He had simply sat by the door with his back against the wood and his sister in his lap, and he had waited. His father had taught him in 8 short years what waiting looked like. He had done his father proud. The cottage took them all in. 15 people when the last sled was emptied, plus Marin, plus the children, plus Halden. 18. The main room was crowded. The alcove off the back was packed. The flagstones were covered in blankets. People sat shoulder to shoulder along the walls. Wren was the youngest. The grandmother from town was the oldest. She was 91. The cottage held them. The cottage held its temperature. 52, 53, sometimes 54 when the body heat of 15 extra people pushed it up. Marin made stew on the iron stove, big pots of it, bacon and onions and beans, and the cheese melted in for richness. She ladled it out into every bowl, every cup, every container she had. She told people to eat slowly. to drink water first. Halden moved through the room and pressed warm cloths to the worst frozen fingers. He worked the old fingers gently. He whispered to people. He called them by their names. He had grown up with most of them. He had buried half of them already. In another sense, when their lives had drifted away from his on the slow tide of small-town years, he had them back now. For a little while, Mrs. Wexford recovered consciousness an hour after they got her into the cottage. She blinked at the ceiling. She looked around. She saw Marin. She started to cry. Just a little, the dry, choked crying of an old woman who has been told all her life not to make a fuss. Marin sat down on the flagstone beside her cot. "Edna," she said. "Edna, you're all right." "I voted against you," Mrs. Wexford whispered. Marin froze. "What? The newspaper? The bets? I put $1 in?" Marin stared. Mrs. Wexford, Edna, was 83 years old. She had taught second grade for 38 years. She was crying because she had bet $1. Marin took the old woman's hand. "Edna, it's all right." "I didn't think you'd make it," Mrs. Wexford whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Edna, you're here now." Roland came around in the third hour. He had been laid by the inside wall, near the hearth, the warmest spot Marin had. Wren had asked, when they were carrying him in, if he was going to die. Marin had said, "I don't know." Wren had said, "Do you want him to?" Marin had said, "No," and realized as she said it that it was true. Roland's eyes opened. He turned his head. He saw the room around him. He saw the people lining the walls, the children on blankets, the old man, his old neighbor, Mr. Atkinson, still reading aloud quietly from the Bible to anyone who wanted to listen. He saw the warm walls of a cottage that had no fire burning. He saw Halden Marsh changing the dressing on someone's frost-bitten foot. He saw Marin. She was kneeling by Mrs. Wexford, spooning broth into her mouth, slowly, patiently, the way you feed a baby. He stared at his sister-in-law for a long time. His eyes filled. He did not know he was crying until a tear ran into his ear. Mrs. Wexford fell asleep. Marin rose. She crossed the room. She knelt down by Roland. She did not speak first. She just waited. He spoke. His voice was a husk. The cold had done something to his throat that would take weeks to heal. "Marin, yes, I want to tell you something. You don't have to." "I do." "Then tell me." He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the dark beams above, the same beams Marin had stared at the first night. He spoke in pieces. "The farm was in debt. Marin waited. For 3 years. I told him not to. I told Calder. I had bad investments. I needed his name on a second mortgage. He wouldn't sign. He kept the farm. But the bank had me by the throat." For a long time, Marin did not speak. I went up there to the house 3 weeks before he died to beg him to sign. He wouldn't. He told me. He said, "Roland, I will not put my children's home on the table for your mistakes." He said it just like that. I yelled at him. I told him he was the reason I would lose everything. I told him he had always thought he was better than me. He looked at me. He looked at me, Marin, like a stranger. 2 weeks later he died. The doctor said he had a thing in his heart from his father's side. Said it could go at any age. But Marin, I sat in the bank the morning he died and I felt relief. I felt relief? That's a thing you only feel once, about someone you grew up with. You can't unfeel it. It stays. I took the farm because the will said I could. I took the farm to pay the bank. I told myself it was the only way. I told myself you'd be all right. I told myself a lot of things. I locked the door behind you. He stopped. His shoulders shook. "Marin, I am not asking you to forgive me. I will never ask you for that. I am not even asking to live. If you tell me to walk back down the ridge, I will walk back down the ridge. I am only telling you so that you know what Calder was, what I was not. He went quiet. The room was silent. Marin had not realized that the whole room was listening, but of course it was. There was nowhere else to be. Halden was holding Mrs. Wexford's hand on the other side of the hearth. He was not looking at Roland, he was looking at the floor. His face was the face of a man who had known this story already, in pieces, for years, and had never been able to say it out loud. Marin looked down at her brother-in-law. She did not move. She did not speak. She thought of Calder's note in her coat pocket. She thought of the lock clicking. She thought of the newspaper with the names of the people who had bet against her. She thought of Wren saying, "Do you want him to die?" She thought of her son, sitting by the door for 4 hours, waiting. She thought, "If I let him die now, I will always be the woman who let her brother-in-law die. I will not be the woman my children watched. I will not be the woman Calder married. I will not be the woman Cordelia would have wanted in her house. I will not be the woman Iris hid a key for in a wall. I will be something else. I will be smaller. I will not." She knelt down further, closer to Roland's face. She took his hand. She held it. His fingers were still ice. She did not warm them. She just held them. "Roland, yes, I don't forgive you." He closed his eyes. "I might never forgive you." He nodded into the blanket. "But I am not going to let you die." His face crumpled. "I am not going to let you die, because that is not who Calder married. I am not going to let you die, because my children are watching. I am not going to let you die, because this house was built on someone forgiving someone she shouldn't have had to forgive." He cried, without sound, the whole way. Marin stood. She crossed the room. She picked up the pot of stew. She came back. She knelt again. She fed him. She fed him slowly, the way she had fed her babies. A spoonful, then another. And the people in the cottage watched, and the people in the cottage learned again what mercy looks like up close. It does not look like a movie. It looks like a tired woman with rough hands, feeding a man she has every right to leave on the floor. The thaw came on the 7th day. The roads opened a week after that. The story of the cottage on Whisper Ridge spread out of Bramble Falls and into the county and then into the state. The first reporter came up the ridge on a clear afternoon in early March. The second came the same week. Then a man from the state university, an engineer, a young woman in glasses with a clipboard from the Historical Society. They wanted to see the system. Marin showed them. She led them down into the cellar. She showed them Obadiah's diagrams. She showed them Iris's missing piece. She let them measure things. She let them photograph things. The engineer stood in the middle of the chamber and ran his hand along the smooth stone wall. He said, "This shouldn't work." He said, "But it does." He said, "This is the most elegant passive system I have ever seen documented." He said, "Mrs. Ashby, we need to publish this. The world needs to know." Marin looked at him. She said, "You can publish it." She said, "But Obadiah Thorne's name goes first." She said, "And Iris Marsh's name goes right after his." She said, "I am not on the paper." She said, "I just listened." By summer, the cottage had a new name. The town did not give it the new name. The town tried briefly to call it the Hearth House, the way one of the reporters had called it. Marin did not like that name. It was too easy. It was too pretty. It did not say anything true. She called it something else. She had it carved into a small wooden sign by Halden, who could still hold a knife steady when it mattered. The sign hung by the door, the house that remembers her. It was for Cordelia, who had never lived in her own house. It was for Iris, who had never been allowed to finish hers. It was for every woman whose dream had been called foolish in her own kitchen. The town never argued about the name again. Roland left in April. He had stayed at the cottage 2 more weeks past the storm. Halden had nursed him quietly, professionally, the way an old farmer nurses a horse he has decided to save. Roland had not spoken much. He had eaten what he was given. He had said please and thank you. He had cried in the mornings when he thought no one could hear him. When he was strong enough, he sold the farm. He sold it to a young family from the next county over good people, people who knew what to do with land. He used the money to pay the bank. What was left he put in an envelope. He did not press it into Marin's hand the way he had pressed the first envelope. He set it on her table. He said, "I know it doesn't make any of it right." She did not touch the envelope. She did not refuse it. She did not speak. Roland nodded. He picked up his bag. He walked to the door. He stopped. He looked back, his face, for a moment. In the light coming through the window, looked like Calder's face, the way brothers' faces sometimes do, in certain lights, when both of them have lost too much weight. Roland said, "He was the better one." Marin said, "He was." Roland nodded. He left. She never saw him again. She did, eventually, open the envelope. It was not a fortune. It was enough. She used it to buy a small lot in Bramble Falls, a storefront, an abandoned creamery, of all places, near where Halden's red gate stood at the edge of town. She turned it into a workshop, a learning center, not for the system. The university and the historical society had taken over publishing the system, the schematics, the mortar formulas, the brass valve patterns. Engineers were already retrofitting old farmhouses across 2 counties. They sent her letters of thanks. She kept the letters in a tin on her windowsill. The workshop was for something else. The workshop was for women, any woman, any age, any income, who needed a place to fix the door of her own life. Marin taught the practical things she had learned the hard way: how to lay a hearth, how to mix mortar, how to read a roof line, how to thicken a wall against wind, how to listen to a stone. She did not charge. She accepted donations of food, of firewood, of yarn, of company. Mrs. Wexford came every Tuesday and made the coffee. The grandmother from the shelter brought scones. The young woman from the historical society sometimes drove out on the weekends and read to the children of the women in the workshop so the women could work. Halden taught a class on tool maintenance. He was, by his own admission, the only old man in Bramble Falls who had been formally invited to be useful to a room full of women. He took the duty seriously. He shaved on workshop days. It went on like that, through the summer, through the fall, through another winter, this one ordinary. The cottage breathed its way through it. The town did not this time run out of fuel. Spring came again. Marin turned 35. There was no party. She did not want one. Wren made her a card. Silas made her a small wooden box from scraps of pine he had saved. Halden gave her a pressed wildflower in a glass frame. He told her it was Iris's favorite yellow trillium. From the back fence of his old farmhouse, she put it on her windowsill next to the tin of letters. On a soft evening in late May, she sat on her porch. The stone of the porch was warm with the day's sun. Silas and Wren were chasing fireflies in the yard. Silas had grown. He was 9 now. His father's hands were not so big on him anymore. Wren was 7. She had begun to look like Marin. Around the eyes, Halden sat beside her on the porch step. He had brought tea. His hands had grown more arthritic over the winter. His knees were no better. He came up to the cottage 2 or 3 times a week now. Sometimes she went down to him, in his small farmhouse at the Red Gate. They had a quiet thing. It was not romance. They were too old, both of them, in different ways for that. It was something else. It was companionship. It was the way two people sit on the same bench without needing the same coat. It was, Marin thought, what was supposed to come after grief. If grief was lucky, Halden sipped his tea. He said, Iris would have liked you. Marin said, I would have liked her. He nodded. He looked out at the children chasing the lights. He said, she would have been proud of you. Marin said, Calder would have been proud of you too. Halden's chin trembled, just once. He nodded. He did not speak. They watched the children for a long time. The wind came up off the valley. It moved through the new grass along the porch. It carried the smell of warm earth and the last of the apple blossoms from the orchard down the slope, the orchard Roland had once owned and had not, in the end, been able to keep. Marin put her hand flat on the stone of the porch. It was the same stone Obadiah Thorne had set in place in 1888. It was the same stone Iris Marsh had touched, weeping, in 1978. It was the same stone her brother-in-law had sat against the night he wept. It was the same stone her children walked on every morning. The stone was warm. The stone was alive. The stone remembered her. The stone remembered all of them. Marin closed her eyes. She let the breath of the house come up through her palm. She thought, I was given nothing. I found everything. She did not say it aloud. She did not need to. The wind said it for her. And inside the walls of the cottage that had not been a tomb after all, but a covenant, Cordelia Thorne and Iris Marsh and Calder Ashby heard her, the end.